Welcome back. Deal or no deal? That is the question for M&A activity right now. $450 billion in deals in the U.S. have been scrapped this year, the most since 2007. Our next guest says M&A is still on track for the second best performance in 5 years. But what impact will UK's exit from the European Union have on mergers and acquisitions in the second half of the year? I want to bring in Jeanneret right now. He is EY America's Vice Chair of Transaction Advisory Services, and it is great to see you, Rich. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be back.
Impact of Britain leaving the EU on deals.
I think in the short term it is a setback for sure. And unfortunate because M&A was picking up in April and May. We had a couple of really good months, almost $200 billion in deals in the U.S. in May. And this is a setback. M&A trades off cash, confidence, and credit. And credit started to get better in the second quarter. It was what held the M&A markets back in the first quarter. Now our confidence has been undermined by this setback. I think in the short term you've seen the market volatility. That will cause investors to pause. But I do think there are some offsets that could, make this less dramatic on deal volumes the rest of the year.
Like what?
Well, currency. So, currencies are surging against the pound right now, not just in the U.S., but Asian buyers as well who've been looking to do acquisitions overseas. The Chinese, the Japanese, the U.S. want to pick up good intellectual assets in the U.K. They've got an advantage now, not just due to currency, but if you believe that this setback causes the economy to recede and Britain or the Eurozone GDP retracts or goes into recession, that's going to bring down multiples as well. And so I think that creates an opportunity. In the UK, portfolios are likely to get rationed and you see some deals come up for market. So there could be some offsets the second half of the year. In the short term, it's likely to retract.
Are there certain sectors that are being hit more than others?
As a result of this deal, I think financial services will for sure. I mean, the concerns in the UK and in the Eurozone about the trading profits of those businesses. What does currency, volatility mean to earnings? I think that the valuations of those institutions recede because earnings go back, and that makes those deals tougher to get done in the short term.
Between now and January, when we have a new president being inaugurated, would companies wait again for a friendlier administration, given the way that this administration has gotten in the middle of, well, even just Pfizer-Allergan, for example?
Yeah, good question. I mean, and we get asked that question a lot. If you look back over history, we've not seen any discernible pattern pre-election, at least in the United States, on how M&A trades. So at this point, I would say it doesn't have a big impact. I think that the inversion issue is settled for now, for sure. And at the end of the day, unless you have a big ramp up in other economic consequences as a result of this greater uncertainty that causes a swing towards a more protectionist view of the economy, if Trump looks like he could get elected, that might cause people to wait because trade wars are clearly a concern about those who follow this election. And trade is an important part of the global economy that does have an impact on how companies think about M&A and the value of those businesses.
But there's also the regulatory environment in general, right? Because the UK is going to have to come up with a whole new regulatory framework, not just for financial services, but also for drug makers.
Yeah. And there's already been talk about it. There was great progress in the Eurozone about dealing with the costs of how life sciences pharma companies trade, how they deal with supply chain and tax issues across border. That could get all undone now. That creates a greater uncertainty for them. That could move up the cost. But that also then creates an opportunity for these companies to grow. Look, if you believe that this historic vote causes economic growth to recede in the short term, that makes growth harder for companies. Some would argue we're in the 7th inning of this economic cycle, and that's the time where M&A can actually pick up a little bit, and people go out and buy growth, particularly in that sector.
China has been a big buyer of America. Is that the big buyer right now, Asia, or is it another sort of when you look at foreigners?
You mean in the UK and
no, in the U.S.
Yeah, the Japanese have been big investors in the U.S. for now several years. The Chinese for sure. I think U.S. buyers keep going. I think that's helped the M&A market stay relatively resilient this year. That and activism as well.
Cheap credit in Japan.
Well, cheap credit in Japan. Credit's cheaper here now. I mean, the flight to safety causes yields to contract, and that creates opportunities to lower the cost of financing. In the UK, some would say that the widening of spreads actually brings more money back into loan funds, which has hurt the first quarter activity in the U.S. There was not as much credit chasing deals.
Really good analysis. Rich, great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. Jeanneret there from